So imagine you're opening up a high fantasy epic, right?
Okay, yeah.
You're getting all settled in for, a classic story about ancient kingdoms and magic. You're reading the very first paragraph of this tense desert ambush.
Right, swords and sandals kind of vibes?
Exactly. And suddenly, right in the middle of it, a character who is literally just called the reader steps right onto the page.
Wait, like physically steps in?
Yes. Steps into view, puts down a scroll, and actually starts complaining about the author's verbiage. I mean, that is exactly what happens on page 1 of the manuscript we're looking at today.
Which is just, it completely destabilizes the whole foundation of the narrative before the foundation is even fully poured,
Yeah.
The text is basically telling you right from the very first breath that the walls of this universe are paper thin, and they're already tearing.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking a truly massive, just completely boundary-shattering text called Atanatkin, the Novelist.
It is quite a ride.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to track exactly how this story uses this incredibly violent collision of fantasy, hard sci-fi, and metafiction.
Right, because it's not just a gimmick.
No, not at all. It's not just playing with genre tropes. It uses that collision to execute a really profound exploration of consciousness, of reality, and what it actually means to be the author of your own life.
Yeah.
Because we start in the sands of this ancient desert, we shift violently into a world of hypercubes and cyborgs, and we basically end up sitting at the author's desk.
And the progression there is handled so masterfully. Like it mimics the expanding cosmic awareness of the characters themselves.
Oh, totally.
As their understanding of their universe scales up, the genre itself literally has to mutate just to contain that new understanding. But to really appreciate that mutation, you have to look at the baseline reality that the story sets up first.
Right. The baseline is this kingdom called Egyptia. So we are dropped into these rolling, luminant sands under starlight, and the whole atmosphere feels, heavily indebted to classic visceral fantasy.
Very much so.
We have a society ruled by a god monarch, the Golden King, Pharaoh Atanatkin. And there's this immediate, really grounded political conflict happening right out of the gate.
Yeah, the Arrow Shield conspiracy.
Exactly. This rebel faction called Arrow Shield is staging an assassination attempt on the Pharaoh's carriage.
And the primary actors in this ambush, they basically set the rules of engagement for the listener.
Yeah.
You have Captain Mummius, who's this strict military traditionalist. You have the architect Inhosa, and then you have the sorceress Gulu.
Right.
And the text spends a lot of time describing Gulu using this mystical energy known as magic. And by the way, that's spelled with an E and a J, not an A and a G.
Right, magic.
Yeah, so she uses this magic to cast a concealment veil over her allies on a ridge. So it establishes a world where this formless, spell-casting energy is treated as a standard tactical military asset.
And the combat descriptions really reinforce those brutal, localized stakes. I mean, it's mud, it's blood, chariots, the clash of steel. Mummius and his men engage the Pharaoh's forces, and it just reads like a standard medieval skirmish.
Until Tenhut shows up.
Right. But even before that, if you look closely at the language during this ambush, the seams of the fantasy genre are already kind of showing.
Oh, definitely.
Because the Pharaoh's forces are aided by Tenhut, who is the Lord Commander of the Black Guard. And when he enters the fray, he doesn't just, kill Mummius with a sword.
No, it's way more extreme than that.
He wields this staff that emits a blinding light, and he literally vaporizes Mummius's arm. I mean, the arm just ceases to exist.
Yeah, the sudden escalation of force there is super jarring. The prose shifts from describing swords glancing off fields to describing literal matter being eradicated.
Right. And if I'm reading this cold, my first instinct, or, anyone's first instinct, is to assume Tenhut is just a really high-level magic user.
Sure.
I mean, in a tabletop RPG campaign or a fantasy setting, a wizard disintegrating someone isn't entirely out of bounds. But the terminology the author uses to describe Tenhut feels totally anachronistic for a desert kingdom.
The terminology is the absolute key here. The text describes Tenhut's voice as electric. It notes that his distorted respiration crackled and hissed.
Right.
It explicitly states that his voice is glitching in pitch.
Yeah.
Those are mechanical, digital descriptors.
Yeah, you don't describe a wizard's voice as glitching. You describe a broken audio file that way.
Exactly. And furthermore, just observe his armor.
Right.
He wears this wolf-like mask, but the text says it's forged from titanium black and silver, carrying railways of reflecting light.
Railways of light, that's so sci-fi.
Right, and it features visors that lift mechanically to reveal, quote, bright green neon lights beaming downward. And when he finally defeats the rebel champion Ashen Belm, an automatic clamp unfolds to deliver his staff.
An automatic clamp.
Yeah, the text is actively infecting the fantasy aesthetic with the vocabulary of cybernetics and advanced engineering.
It totally is. It paints a picture of a society that isn't just relying on mystical incantations. Like, later on, other characters refer to the Blackguard's abilities not as sorcery, but as Blackguard sciences.
The science of it.
Which really implies a systematic, empirical study of this medic. I mean, Mummius actually bleeds out in the sand, claiming he is dying for inherent traditional Egyptian values.
And how does Ten Hut respond?
Ten Hut doesn't counter with theology or divine right, which is what you'd expect. He counters with biology. He literally tells Mummius that history and biology teach us to embrace change and adapt or perish as a consequence.
Which is wild. Ten Hut sounds like an evolutionary biologist analyzing a failed species right there.
He really does.
And this all points to the underlying mechanics of Egyptia. These anachronisms, the glitching, the titanium, the neon, they aren't just aesthetic flourishes, they are actual bleed-throughs from a ruptured physics engine.
Right.
The fantasy world is already compromised because of a massive historical cataclysm in their timeline known as Jube's Mistake.
Oh man, Jube's Mistake. This cataclysm is the causal link that basically drags the narrative kicking and screaming from fantasy into hard science fiction.
Yeah, the pivot.
But to understand what Jube broke, we first have to establish what magic actually is. Because the text reveals that it isn't magic at all, right? Not in the sense of words spoken to appease a deity or whatever.
No, not at all. It is the direct manipulation of molecular, quantum fields, and electromagnetic forces.
Wow.
Basically, it's the localized application of the observer effect in quantum mechanics, but scaled up to a macro level. The Egyptians have figured out that human consciousness can alter the atomic structure of reality.
So when Gulu casts that concealment spell earlier.
Right, when she casts it, she isn't summoning a mystical fog. She is literally bending light particles around her physical coordinates by imposing her conscious will onto the electromagnetic spectrum.
That implication is just fascinating, because if it's just the manipulation of atomic structures through consciousness, why do they still treat it like a mystical art? I mean, why do they have ancient wizards like Jube performing these elaborate rituals?
Because the human mind requires scaffolding, you know.
Okay, what do you mean by scaffolding?
Well, to concentrate hard enough to bend a quantum field, an unassisted human mind needs a psychological focus mechanism, a chant, a specific set of gestures, a ritual.
Oh, I see.
The ritual itself does absolutely nothing. It is merely the cognitive framework that allows the practitioner's consciousness to collapse the wave function in a highly specific way.
That makes so much sense. So Jube was an incredibly powerful quantum practitioner, and the text notes he was living in isolation, he was fleeing persecution, and his mind was plagued by this intense, overwhelming fear.
Right.
And he decides to perform what he calls a destruction ritual. He essentially wants to disassemble his own body on a molecular level. It's basically quantum suicide.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
But because his emotional state was so chaotic, his intention fractured.
He couldn't maintain that cognitive scaffolding we were talking about. His chaotic terror projected outward into the quantum field. And instead of just unbinding his own atoms, he completely unbound the barriers maintaining the separation between parallel realities. He tore the fabric of space and time.
The best way to visualize this, and I love this analogy, it isn't just a hole in the sky, it's like taking a really high-powered magnet and pressing it against an old CRT television screen.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Jube permanently scrambled the electromagnetic alignment of his entire universe. The picture of his reality became distorted, and that allowed other channels to bleed through onto the screen.
And that created the Dark Era. 300 years where the sun was blocked, foreign entities poured in, and this entire region called Senhel became a permanent vortex of warped physics.
Which is terrifying.
Very. And that profound distortion, it basically acts as a beacon. A rupture of that magnitude in the multidimensional fabric attracts attention, which brings us back to the courtyard of Pharaoh Akhenaten, where the Egyptians finally meet the entities that are operating on the frequencies that Jube accidentally exposed.
And the visual contrast of this encounter is just incredible. You have the pharaoh He's holding court in traditional robes, surrounded by spell swords. And suddenly, this massive, mirror-like cylindrical spacecraft one that actively absorbs light descends from the sky and lands directly in his marble courtyard.
Right, the ramp lowers and outglide the dreadnoughts.
Yes.
And these are not mystical beings, they are towering cyborgs, practitioners of what the text calls metaphysical cybernetics.
What a phrase, metaphysical cybernetics.
Right. They possess these massive reverse-jointed legs, highly reflective armor, and their faces are literally just black mirrors. They step out and immediately deploy bright red laser scanners to map the area.
Right, we're introduced to Ambassador Andros and a scientist named Okadega, who's also interestingly referred to numerically as 810.
Yeah, very sci-fi.
And they are just tossing around terms like dimensional mathematics and wielding tesseracts, which are four-dimensional hypercubes.
They are the self-appointed keepers of balance in the cosmos, which they refer to as the verse. They calculate origin points and manage sector stability.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting to me. I'd initially assumed that if a spaceship lands in front of an army of spell swords, the fancy characters would just lose their minds.
Right, it's like dropping a xenomorph into a Shakespeare play.
Exactly. A hypercube calculating dimensional math fundamentally breaks a cosmology built on gods and magic. You'd think it would induce mass psychosis. Do their minds just break when confronted with this?
Well, you would expect a complete ontological collapse, yeah. But the Egyptians remain remarkably composed. And the reason why really highlights the brilliance of the world building here.
How so?
Because the Egyptians practice mejeki, because they regularly project their consciousness into formless energies and manipulate the astral plane. They already accept that the universe is comprised of infinite layered realities.
Oh, wow. So to the pharaoh, a cyborg stepping out of a spaceship isn't some incomprehensible alien from another planet.
No, it's just a strange entity from a different plane of existence that happens to be using a very loud metallic chariot.
That is so cool.
Precisely. Their cosmology is fluid enough to absorb the sci-fi elements without breaking. Anunnaki doesn't worship them as gods. He assesses them as peers, or honestly, perhaps rivals.
Right.
He tells Ambassador Andros that Ahipcha is not some simple play to be managed. The pharaoh is already thinking about how to extend his own dominion across these new multidimensional vectors.
But the dreadnoughts bring with them this cosmological framework that finally explains how the magic and the sci-fi actually coexist. Okadega explains that the universe is underpinned by the progenitor of consciousness, which divided into two fundamental forces, Titan and Omega.
And this duality is the engine of the entire manuscript.
Tell us about it.
Well, Titan is the architecture of the universe. It represents structure, form, mental clarity, logic, and physical laws. Omega, on the other hand, is the resonance. It represents emotion, awareness, spiritual depth, and feeling. Every single molecule in existence contains a ratio of Titan to Omega.
Got it. And the dreadnoughts, they were engineered by the Titan force to maintain structural balance, right?
Yes.
But Okadega actually admits a critical flaw in their design. They have almost completely lost touch with Omega. They have logic, they have structure, but they fundamentally lack emotional awareness.
Exactly.
Conversely, the Egyptians' magic relies heavily on Omega. They use profound emotional intention to manipulate the physical structure of Titan.
It creates a really fascinating thematic mirror. The cyborgs have pure science, but absolutely no soul. The Egyptians have immense soul and willpower, but their application of it is incredibly chaotic and destructive, as we saw with Jube's mistake.
You know, taking a step back here, this concept of Titan and Omega is incredibly relevant for anyone listening right now.
Oh, for sure.
Think about how modern society operates. We are constantly pressured to optimize our lives for Titan. Productivity, structure, logical career progression, measurable metrics.
Yeah, optimizing everything.
We build these incredibly structured, rigid lives, and in the process, we completely starve our Omega, our emotional resonance, our intuition, our actual connection to the feeling of being alive. We become like the dreadnoughts, highly efficient, but fundamentally disconnected from the source of our own consciousness.
The disconnection is exactly what causes systems to break down, both in our everyday lives and in the text. I mean, the dreadnoughts arriving was merely a symptom of the cosmic imbalance. The real consequence of Jube's mistake scrambling that CRT television of reality is that time itself lost its linearity.
Right.
The channels didn't just bleed into each other, they violently merged.
Which brings us to the anomaly of Dark City. Because if the sci-fi elements were an invasion, what happens next is a full-blown collision of realities. The Egyptian army, alongside a contingent of dreadnought allies, is marching toward that dark vortex of Sen-Hell. And without warning, an entire metropolis drops right onto the desert floor.
Out of nowhere.
The text is extremely precise about this, too. Dreadnought telemetry records that the city materialized in exactly 0.0431 seconds.
It is an instantaneous geographic rewrite. The desert is just instantly replaced by a sprawling, dystopian cyberpunk skyline. We're talking black glossing streets, neon signage, towering skyscrapers.
But it isn't just the ground level.
No, the sky itself is overwritten by a grid. It's this synthetic cage of light that encompasses the atmosphere, literally snapping over the globe like a digital net.
Okadega analyzes the quantum field of this new environment and determines it is from Timeline 6. It's an abandoned, futuristic era of their own planet that has essentially been yanked backward through time and grafted onto the present.
And the battlefield that ensues is just a masterpiece of genre collision. You have Egyptian spell swords and dreadnoughts firing lasers, fighting side by side against the horrific anomalies of Sen-Hell minotaurs, dark weather entities, and these warped monsters, all happening in the neon-lit alleyways of a cyberpunk city.
It's total sensory overload. But amidst all this chaos, the characters start experiencing really profound shifts in their understanding of reality. General Dak, who's an Egyptian commander, he wanders into a high-rise building in Dark City and stumbles upon a bizarre scene.
Yeah, he finds two extraterrestrial entities just casually lounging in a room.
Right.
One of them resembles an insect-rodent hybrid, and the other has an egg-shaped head. They are literally just smoking and observing the chaos outside.
So surreal. And the insectoid creature, Morekton, engages Dak in this philosophical dialogue that just completely shatters the remaining illusions of the Egyptian cosmology. Morekton explains that the underlying fabric of the cosmos isn't magic, and it isn't even just quantum physics, it is a code of perception.
And Morekton uses a brilliant analogy to explain this to Dak. He tells him that the space around them appears empty only because Dak's biological perception is tuned to a very limited frequency.
Okay, right.
To a microscopic insect, a smooth glass surface is a rigid mountainous terrain. But to a quantum life form observing that exact same glass, it's a vast expanse of mostly empty space between swirling atoms. The physical world isn't a fixed object at all. It is a code that renders differently depending on the operating system of the observer.
Wow, so reality is a multi-dimensional construct. It's basically a consensus hallucination generated by consciousness.
Exactly.
And this conversation plants the seed of metafiction, because if reality is a code that renders based on observation, then who wrote the source code?
Right, who coded the matrix?
Even Okadega's programming begins to fracture under the weight of this implication. Interacting with the chaotic willpower of the Egyptians triggers latent memories in his cybernetic mind. He actually starts remembering fragments of the source code. He theorizes to Pharaoh Akhenaten that the progenitor of consciousness isn't just a passive physical force. He believes the source is actively molding reality like a theater director, manipulating events with a specific narrative intent.
The characters are evolving from understanding physics to suspecting narrative design. They're beginning to sense the actual presence of an author. And Tenhut discovers the mechanism of that authorship inside the Nexus Tower.
Yeah, let's talk about the Nexus Tower. Tenhut infiltrates this massive skyscraper right at the center of Dark City. He locates a central control room housing a metallic console, multiple screens emitting blue light, and a silver keyboard.
And here is where the synthesis of magic and technology really pays off. Tenhut is a man who channels cosmic energy through a staff. But he approaches this futuristic computer terminal and interfaces with it seamlessly.
I have to admit, when I first read this, trying to visualize a warrior who casts spells sitting down to type on a silver keyboard felt completely absurd. Like, how does he even know what a file directory is, you know?
Well, he isn't reading the screen in the way you or I would. His mastery of music allows him to feel the electromagnetic currents pulsing through the microchip.
Well, that's clever.
Right. He senses the flow of data as a quantum stream. When he touches the keyboard, he is manipulating the binary code at the atomic level, translating his conscious intention directly into the machine's architecture.
He effectively hacks the mainframe of the city using quantum telepathy. He discovers the computer is actively cataloging artifacts, it's managing industrial systems for City 953221, and generating physical matter.
And then he finds the file.
Yes. He locates a file labeled Dead Ray within a war matter directory, and he inputs a command to delete immaterial sentient life utilizing the city's own code to materialize a massive, cybernetic, zombie-like creature to fight the Senhel anomalies outside.
Tenhut isn't just pressing buttons to fire a weapon. He is accessing the world-building software of his own reality. The console is a narrative editing tool.
A literal narrative editing tool, yeah.
By altering the code to summon the dead ray, Tenhut transitions from being a character governed by the rules of the world to a co-author actively rewriting the parameters of the scene.
But summoning a weapon isn't enough for Tenhut. His entire psychological profile is built on the need for absolute control. If there is a console, there is a coder. And he wants to find the architect of Dark City, the entity projecting the Senhel anomaly. He wants to conquer the source.
Naturally.
To do that, he must commit the ultimate act of transgression. He has to actually climb out of his own universe.
Which leads to such an incredible sequence. He locates a ventilation shaft in the Nexus Tower. He pulls himself into it, crawling through the ductwork. But he doesn't emerge onto the roof of the skyscraper.
No.
The physics engine breaks entirely. He pushes open the grate and drops into a room that defies all logic established in the story so far.
And the sensory details of this new environment are so crucial here. Tenhut finds himself in a room with maroon carpeting. The light isn't the neon glare of Dark City, and it isn't the harsh sun of Ahipsha. It is an ambient, warm amber.
Yeah.
There are couches made of woodland timber, and at the far end of the room, positioned against the wall, is an antique oak desk.
Sitting at that desk is a man in formal attire. He's typing on a keyboard, but there are no letters or numbers on the keys. Instead, holographic colors bloom over each key as he strikes it.
Tenhut has found the architect.
He meets the novelist, and the genre of the text shifts for the final time. We have fully left fantasy, we have left sci-fi, we are now entirely in the realm of existential metafiction.
It's all stripped away.
The magic, the quantum cybernetics, the multidimensional code, they were all just elaborate metaphors for the creative process of writing a story.
Tenhut demands to know where he is, and the novelist, without even looking away from his holographic keys, casually informs Tenhut that he is standing inside an archived reality called Document 8.
The novelist doesn't present himself as a god in the religious sense, but as the literal author of the manuscript. He tells Tenhut, "I in consciousness, you will perceive me as nothing less."
And the visual realization of this for Tenhut is just horrifying. He looks past the novelist at the wall of the office. But it isn't a wall. It's a cascading railway of icons forming words. It is the text of his own life, scrolling in real time.
Oh, wow.
The prose states that Tenhut realized he wasn't observing Document 8 through a window. He was in the document. He is standing inside the word processor.
Imagine the psychological devastation of that. Tenhut has defined his entire existence through dominion. He is the Lord Commander, this evolutionary absolutist who believes his strength dictates his reality.
Right.
To suddenly perceive yourself as merely a string of verbs and nouns generated by someone else's fingertips, it's the ultimate loss of control.
And this brings up a massive philosophical dilemma, one that really mirrors real-world debates about determinism versus free will. Like, this is the ultimate meet your maker moment. It's like a video game character crawling out of the monitor and sitting on the programmer's desk.
Exactly.
But if Tenhut is just a program, a fiction executing a pre-written script, then his entire struggle is meaningless. The trauma he endured, the people he killed, his sheer willpower to survive, it's all just ink on a page. It renders his existence entirely hollow. So my question for you is, does Tenhut lose his free will knowing he's just a character, or does he finally gain it?
That is the fear. But the text suggests something far more complex, and he actually gains it.
Yeah.
The novelist clarifies the mechanics of their relationship. He tells Tenhut, "I only gave you form, the means to arrive here through an ordered state. Your subtle will and unchanging passion have created a most powerful intention. Through this purity, you have found me."
So the author provided the Titan structure, the setting, the physical laws, the initial conflict. But Tenhut provided the omega, the raw, undeniable willpower that forced the narrative off his predicted tracks.
Exactly. The characters possess a degree of autonomy driven by their emotional resonance. But the tragedy, as the novelist reveals, is that the characters use their autonomy to perpetually recreate their own suffering.
Oh, that's dark.
The novelist acts as a mirror for human psychology. He tells Tenhut that his obsession with control, his cruelty, his desire for power, it isn't true strength. It is a highly predictable, programmed response to unresolved trauma.
The novelist dissects Tenhut's psychology so flawlessly here. He says, you service your desire as an escape from responsibility, all the while your desire deepens like an unending well, destroying you. The mind enslaves the character to logistical defensive reactions.
The novelist is articulating a profound truth about human nature. We project our internal, unresolved pain onto our external environments. And the novelist actually admits his own deep vulnerability here. He tells Tenhud that he is writing this universe to explore consciousness, to reach his own higher light. He wants to paint a beautiful reality.
But he can't. He says, I long to paint with all characters, but their trauma is a barrier to my affection. What they are feeling is not their own, but a product of the body and its experience there.
It's the ultimate dilemma of the creator. He wants to write a utopia, but the characters' ingrained defensive programming, their historical trauma, constantly warps the narrative back into a grim, dark struggle for survival. The characters are building their own dystopias because they refuse to heal.
And this is where the climax of the book pivots from an existential crisis into a profound moment of spiritual intervention. The novelist needs Tenhut to break his programming. He stops typing. He raises his hand, and from his finger, he projects a swirl of vibrant energy, green, purple, orange, and pink, directly into Tenhut's chest.
He is injecting raw omega energy into a being that has become pure, rigid Titan logic. And he gives Tenhut a series of commands that sound more like a guided meditation than a military order. He tells him to focus, to breathe, and most crucially, he commands him to forgive.
You can run no longer from what it is you are. Forgive. Find your truth. Logic is the enemy if you ignore the creative forces of innovation.
Yeah.
The novelist is explicitly stating that pure logic, pure survival instinct will only ever trap you in a repetitive loop of your past. Innovation, the ability to write a new chapter, requires the emotional vulnerability to forgive the past and let go of the need to control every outcome.
By asking Tenhut to forgive, the novelist is offering him a promotion. He's inviting him to elevate from a character trapped in Document 8 to a co-creator of the overarching narrative. He tells him, we will do the work together, the both of us.
It's an absolutely staggering journey. We started this deep dive analyzing the physics of a sword fight in the desert sand.
Right.
We tracked the collapse of that reality as quantum mechanics and dimensional mathematics bled through the CRT screen of the universe. We watched towering cyborgs do battle in a cyberpunk city dropped into a temporal vortex. And we ended up in a quiet, maroon-carpeted office, exploring the psychological trauma of a fictional character, realizing he is a manifestation of his author's consciousness.
And every single genre shift was causally linked to the evolution of the characters' minds. As they learned to perceive reality not as a fixed physical location, but as a multi-dimensional code driven by intention, the universe itself had to morph to accommodate their expanded perception.
Which really brings this entire narrative crashing right into your living room, your car, wherever you're listening to this. We talked earlier about the imbalance of Titan and Omega in modern life, but the novelist's critique of Tenhut goes even deeper. Think about the genre of your own life. How often do you feel trapped in a repetitive narrative loop?
We all operate on underlying scripts, expectations inherited from our families, societal definitions of success, defense mechanisms forged by our own past traumas. We convince ourselves that our reactions are logical, that our desire for control is absolutely necessary for survival.
But just like Tenhut executing orders for the Pharaoh, we are often just playing out a highly predictable program. We are characters letting our past author our future. The radical proposition of this manuscript is that the script can be hacked. You are not confined to the document.
Yeah.
If you can balance your Titan logic with your Omega emotional resonance, if you can find the courage to forgive your past and stop letting fear dictate your actions, you can climb through the ventilation shaft of your own habits. You can sit down at the console.
It demands taking absolute responsibility for the reality you project into the world. You cannot build a utopia in your life if you are constantly projecting the trauma of your past onto your present.
You have to become the co-author of your own existence. But as empowering as that is, I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought drawn from the closing moments of Tenhut's interaction with his creator. Tenhut, standing in the office, processes everything the novelist has told him. He realizes the magnitude of the entity before him, and he says, "If you are my creator, you are the enigma of it all."
And the novelist's response is the final twist of the knife. He doesn't claim ultimate supremacy. He replies, "The story is much longer and travels far deeper than you intended. Through you speaking to me, I too am speaking to my higher light."
Tenhut, realizing the implication of this, asks, if that is so, whose story is this? And the novelist looks at him and simply says, R, O-U-R, or A-U-R, referencing the our Earth, our story.
The novelist, sitting at his desk manipulating the universe of Document 8, is ultimately revealing that he's just a character in someone else's book. His attempt to write Tenhut is merely his own programmed attempt to reach his creator.
The layers of perception never cease. If Tenhut is a fiction generated by the trauma and intention of the novelist, and the novelist is just a fiction generated by an even higher dimension of consciousness, how many layers of authorship exist above you right now? Look around the room you are in. As you process this deep dive, as you synthesize these philosophies and plan the next chapter of your life, are you the reader? Or are you just another character in another document waiting to see what gets typed next?